Today, the theme of our speech is philosophy. Defining philosophy. The most general definition of philosophy is that it is the pursuit of wisdom, truth, and knowledge. Indeed, the word itself means love of wisdom, yin, Greek. Whenever people think about deep, fundamental questions concerning the nature of the universe and ourselves, the limits of human knowledge, their values, and the meaning of life, they are thinking about philosophy. Philosophical thinking is found in all parts of the world, present and past. In the academic world, philosophy distinguishes a certain area of study from all other areas such as the sciences and other humanities. Philosophers typically consider questions that are, in some sense, broader and or more fundamental than other inquiries. For example, physicists ask what caused some event. Philosophers ask whether causation even exists. Historians study figures who fought for justice. Philosophers ask what justice is or whether their causes were. In fact, just economists study the allocation of capital. Philosophers debate the ethical merits of capitalism. When a topic becomes amenable to rigorous empirical study, it tends to be outsourced to its own field and not described in the present day as philosophy anymore. What does moral importance look like in a microscope? The main method of academic philosophy is to construct and evaluate arguments, that is, reasons, intended to justify some conclusion. Such conclusions might be that some theory is true or false, or might be about the correct analysis or definition of some concept. These arguments generally have at least some conceptual, intellectual, or priority, that is, non-empirical content, and philosophers often incorporate relevant scientific knowledge as premises in arguments to branches of philosophy. Philosophy deals with fundamental questions, but which questions specifically is philosophy about? Here's a standard categorization. Logic. Logicians study good and bad, arguments and reasoning, and they study formal symbolic languages intended to express propositions, sentences, or arguments. Metaphysics. Metaphysicians study what sorts of entities exist, what the world and its constituents are made of, and how objects or events may cause or explain each other episode of logistic model. A gist. Study knowledge, evidence, and justified belief. An epistemologist might study whether we can trust our senses and whether science is trustworthy. Values and value theory. Philosophers study morality, politics, and art, among other topics. People from all cultures contribute to philosophy, more than are typically discussed in Western philosophy courses. Western academic philosophy has often neglected voices from non-Western cultures and women's voices. Philosophers sometimes import tools, knowledge, and language from other fields, such as using the formal tools of statistics, in epistemology, and the insights from special relativity in the philosophy of time. I will use China as an example to compare with Western philosophy. The predecessor of philosophy was mythology and primitive religion. China has philosophy. Chinese people have knowledge of Taoism. Europe has philosophy, Greek philosophy, the eternal of knowledge. This is our expression, is philosophy. So the difference between Chinese and Western philosophy is presented from the different parts of Taoism. Which is the fundamental point of the difference between Chinese and Western philosophy? Western philosophy finally needs to take the path of speculation, which is to push the way of heaven to the other side of the world first. And real life is called this side. The Chinese do not have two worlds, one side and the other. No, there isn't. The starting point of Chinese philosophical institutions is the unity of heaven and man before the emergence of philosophy, which originated from myths and primitive religions. There were myths and indigenous primitive religions in China, so the same goes for Greece and Europe. Greek mythology, the primitive religion of the Greek nation, later formed what is called genealogy. It is the spiritual state of the Greek nation, the world of gods, and the self-control of gods over the fate of city-states before the birth of philosophy. So, before delving into philosophy, the thought of a nation, in its embryonic stage, has formed such characteristics that its foundation is still a nation's way of survival and production. The Chinese nation entered the settled agricultural civilization relatively early, and the natural villages formed by the settled agricultural civilization first formed relationships between people based on blood relations and kinship systems. Therefore, it is a settled agricultural civilization, and people do not move frequently. Moving is seen as a misfortune, which is called leaving one's hometown. So it is a settled agricultural civilization. to establish a reliable and stable social system in the settled agricultural civilization. What is the basis for establishing a social system? According to the system of blood relations and kinship, the so-called order of seniority and seniority, the relationship between predecessors and their descendants also has an ethical principle, which comes from the kinship relationship of blood relations. The principle of social order is derived from this kinship relationship, where younger generations should obey their elders and elders should take necessary responsibility for their lives, thus constituting an ethical relationship. The basis for this ethical relationship is given to us by nature. Family is natural, and each of us is born to parents. Therefore, there is a kinship relationship between parents and others, called family when they are older and family when they are younger. This is a natural thing, and the natural relationship between people is the foundation of Chinese thought and Taoism. If we clarify this ethical principle, then the first step must be the unity of heaven and man. The way of heaven is in life, in the ethical life based on the family unit. The ethical life based on the family is both heaven and life. So European nations have a higher starting point. Before philosophy started, we look at their way of life. Then the geographical environment determines the multi-island Aegean civilization. Yes, so the frequent occurrence of migration from one island to another is called the maritime colonization movement. So the initial units were still tribes. But due to frequent maritime colonization movements, people from different tribes would meet on the same island, and they would have to live peacefully, right? Order needs to be established. What is the basis for establishing social order on the same island when different tribes meet? Of course, it is impossible to establish a kinship system based on kinship. People from different tribes have no blood relationship between them, and there is a kinship system that can be established on it. In this case, there is only a contract. We establish some rules, and everyone follows these rules together. These rules are not based on blood relationship, ethics based on blood relationship, and ethics based on kinship, which is called a contract. The rules based on kinship ethics are themselves ethical rules, and cannot be called contracts. As Greek civilization was born in such a geographical environment, the frequent maritime colonization movements, as their way of survival led to the establishment of the ancient Greek social system. The premise of Chinese philosophy is different from that of Western philosophy, which comes from the way of survival and social organization determined by geographical environment.
The Western perspective situates the actual birth of philosophy in the attempt to understand the world exclusively through rational perspectives, breaking from the traditional mythical and religious explanations for natural phenomena that had pervaded early human history. In this view, ancient philosophy began with the pre-Socratic philosophers around the 7th century BCE, named as such for chronologically preceding Socrates, who marked the start of the classical period in the 5th century BCE, lasting until the 3rd century BCE, and being characterized by some of the most influential figures in the entire history of philosophy. They were followed by the Hellenistic period from the 4th century BCE to the 1st century CE, ending finally with the Roman period up until the 6th century CE. As you can see, some of these periods overlap, as this is largely a thematic organization rather than a chronological one. It is also important to note that much of our understanding comes from only fragments, contemporary discussion, or third-party accounts, and new evidence can alter our understanding of this era, as it already has multiple times before.
Modernism is an important cultural movement of the 20th century, encompassing fields such as art, literature, architecture, and music. The philosophical ideas of modernism originated in the West and have had a profound impact on cultures and ideas worldwide. Firstly, we oppose traditionalism and modernity. The core of modernist philosophy is the conflict and confrontation between traditionalism and modernity. Modernism opposes the worldview and values of traditionalism, criticizes the hindrance of traditional ideas to technology, history, and society, and advocates using experience, reason, and free will as the standards of humanity. Modernism believes that the religion, morality, and authority relied upon by traditionalism have hindered the development of modern society. In contrast, modernism emphasizes the importance of the individual and freedom, science and technology, rational thinking and individual ideas. Modernism pursues genuine understanding, rejects blind obedience to tradition, and strives to find answers in the current social reality. The second is the relativity between knowledge and truth. Modernism subverted traditional ontology and epistemology, proposing the concept of relativity between knowledge and truth. Traditional belief advocates for the existence of an absolute knowledge and truth that can be obtained through a unified and definitive method. However, in modernist philosophical thought, knowledge and truth is seen as relative and diverse, and there is no longer an absolute standard. Modernism advocates that individual subjectivity and relativity play an important role in the generation of knowledge and truth. Different viewpoints and opinions are relative and limited, and no viewpoint can be regarded as universally applicable truth. This concept of relativity and diversity has challenged traditional notions of authority and absoluteness, and promoted the intersection and dialogue of different disciplinary fields. Next is self-subjectivity and individual concept. Modernism emphasizes the subjectivity and autonomy of individuals, encouraging them to pursue independent thinking and free action. Modernism opposes the suppression and restraint of individuals in traditional concepts and attempts to find a balance between individual free will and the common values of the group. Modernist philosophy holds that individuals should independently decide their own behavior and beliefs, break free from the constraints of traditional ideas, and participate in the construction of society and culture with their own independent perspectives. Finally, the reconstruction of social values. Modernism has reconstructed traditional social values, emphasizing the importance of social justice, equality, and individual rights. Modernist philosophy criticizes the issues of inequality and exploitation that exist in traditional societies, and advocates for the establishment of a more just and inclusive social order. Modernism focuses on social issues and development, and attempts to promote social progress through innovation and change. Modernism holds that social values should be constantly adjusted and changed according to the needs of reality and individual choices, and should not be constrained by traditional ideas and authority. In summary, the basic philosophical ideas of modernism encompass opposition to traditionalism and modernity, the relativity of knowledge and truth, self-subjectivity, and individual concepts, as well as the reconstruction of social values. Modernist philosophy attempts to redefine and deconstruct traditional concepts, and promote social and cultural progress by emphasizing individual autonomy and free will. The ideas of modernism have had a profound impact on contemporary society and human civilization, prompting us to re-examine traditional values and face the current social reality by delving into the ideas of modernist philosophy. The ideas of modernism also remind us that in the face of a constantly changing world, we need to maintain an open attitude, explore and criticize knowledge and truth, in order to promote social progress and individual development.